Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to keep exploring the perk, and we're just going to be taking a look at the Austrian attack a little bit deeper. So after e4, d6, we're going to have d4, knight f6, and then we're going to have knight c3, we're going to have pawn to g6, and we're going to have pawn to f4, bishop to g7, knight f3, we're going to have castles kingside, bishop d3, and today we're just going to be exclusively exploring this move, knight to a6. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So knight a6 was actually an idea that a player came up with, a player by the name of Mike Valvo. And if you don't know who he is, he was I would say like a semi-famous international master. He was very famous for doing the commentary in uh, Bobby Fischer's World Championship match. But he was also a strong player in his own right. Back when there weren't a ton of strong players in the United States, having the international master title back in the 1970s was a big deal. He also happened to be a person that I did know while he was still alive, and he was I played him twice. He was the first international master that I ever beat, and I also beat him the second time I played him. Of course, he was well out of his prime by the time I played him, and I would have really loved to have played him back when he was, playing his best chess. Of course, that was before I was born, so it would have been difficult. But anyway, so Mike Valvo came up with this move, knight a6, and I will have to admit that this is probably one of the most annoying moves you'll have to face if you are proficient in the Austrian attack with the white pieces. And the reason is because, of course, the idea behind knight a6 is super straightforward. Black just wants to play the move pawn to c5. And as we've discussed previously in previous examples in the Austrian attack, when we take on c5, we really, really do not want them taking back with a piece, with any piece, whether it's a queen or whether it's a knight. We would like them to take back with the pawn so that we can push e5 and we can cut that board in half. Cutting the board in half is a really important concept and a really important idea for White once he's committed to pushing all three of his central pawns. He really wants to make this push. He wants to play pawn to e5. Another thing that knight a6 does is, since c5 is just so on the table, it makes the push of pawn to e5 immediately, at least in this position, very, very awkward. And actually it scores very, very poorly. People that play pawn to e5 in this position, black actually has a winning score on the master level after pawn to e5. So the broad consensus is that what we should do is we should almost just turn this into sort of like another type of opening. We should play this more like a Benoni, or more to the point, more like a Schmidt Benoni. So what we should do is we should castle, and then after they push the pawn to c5, we obviously shouldn't take it, and we obviously shouldn't try to hold it and turn this into really just kind of a really bad Dragon Sicilian. So we've got a bunch of kind of nasty, bad transpositional options. That's part of the brilliance of this move, knight a6. So we should really turn it into a Schmidt Benoni. We should play the move d5. Now, of course, if you know anything about the Benoni, the move knight a6 is not unuseful in the Benoni either. So it's just a really good move all around. This move knight a6 to support the move pawn to c5 is just a really smart move, and it's just a really good invention by a player that I thought was of course, a very strong player in his own right. International master Mike Valvo. So the concept again behind this move is just we're supporting c5. So this idea that putting your knight on the rim is dim, that's a great idea for beginners. But if you're doing it for a really specific reason and it works out, then it can be actually a very good move. And that's what this move knight a6 is. It's a very good move that supports the pawn push c5, which does take over the center of the board. And really c5 is black's only real way to fight back in the middle of the board. So anyways, I cheerleaded this move enough. So let's talk about what white can do to get a good position here. Well, it's a Schmidt Benoni. So what we're going to need to do is black is going to at some point try to play knight c7. And he's going to try to follow that up with a6 and b5, which is just your normal type of Benoni plan. He might also try to play e6 and maybe exchange on d5, which is, again, the normal type of Benoni plan. So what's white's plan in the Benoni? Well, white's plan in the Benoni is to, number one, maintain his space. Number two, prevent black from getting a6 and b5 easily. So we're going to try to prevent that from happening. And then number three, prepare to push e5 on our own, and hopefully get this move in where we can kind of collapse black's center. So a great example of how all of this went pretty well for white was in Fedosov versus Petrosian, played back in 2017. So that game continued. Black played rook b8. He's trying to play b5. White played a4 immediately. He's just going to go ahead and give up the ghost. This also gives black the option of planting his knight on b4, but we're not terribly scared of these knight b4 plans. They're not significantly better than the knight c7 plans. So really, white has no problem giving up this b4 square. He'd almost rather this knight go to b4 than c7 and support a6 and b5. One of the reasons for this, in these positions, it's very important for black to break out strategically. And this is true in the Benoni, and this is true in the Schmidt-Benoni. It's very important for black to gain queenside space. So whereas knight b4 looks like a juicy square on the surface, if we're not able to play a6 and b5 later, we're ending up with just one good piece in white's position and nothing else. We have less space and we have just a much inferior position in the middle of the board. So normally good players will still end up retreating this knight to c7 even if that b4 square becomes available. So here black plays bishop g4, which is really good in general in the Benoni, in the Schmidt-Benoni, in any position where you have less space. If you start eliminating pieces off of your back rank, it makes things much, much easier. Now you have places to maneuver your pieces behind the lines and then make your central thrusts later. So bishop g4 is good. Now h3, now bishop takes f3, and now here's like a critical moment, or at least in my mind a critical moment. You have a choice to take back. You can take back with the queen or you can take back with the rook. And the move that seems to score better, or the move that I seem to understand a little bit better, because I've tried both, but the move that I seem to understand a little bit better is taking back with the rook. And okay, so the reason that taking back with the rook, in my mind, is a little bit better is because the queen really doesn't belong on f3. I mean, for that matter, the rook probably doesn't belong on f3 either. Neither piece really belongs on f3. But if I put the queen on f3, I'm definitely going to be moving the queen again. Because the queen certainly doesn't really belong on this diagonal. It doesn't support anything that I need it to support. It's on the same file as the rook, and that doesn't make any sense. So if I put the queen on f3, I'm going to be putting the queen back on e2. But I'm not 100% positive the rook belongs on f1. So at least it makes a little bit more sense to play rook f3, because I may not be retreating that rook again. I might not just be continuing with rook f1. Whereas I'm definitely going to be moving my queen again. I'll probably end up moving my queen to e2. I probably won't be moving my rook back to f1. So I feel like queen f3 to e2 is kind of a wasted move, whereas rook f3 at least makes some sense because there's a good chance that I'm going to keep my rook on f3 and I'm going to use it there. So I prefer rook f3 over queen f3, but again, that's just my personal preference. There are people that play queen f3 there. So we have knight d7, we have bishop to c4, and then Petrosian plays correctly. He plays knight c7. He knows that it's more important to try to reinforce the idea of playing a6 and b5 than it is to just put one piece on a weak square, temporarily. So he plays knight to c7, and then white plays bishop e3. In this game, we have a6 and we have a5. So again, this is a big part of the strategy here, is we're just trying to restrict black from making any serious waves on the queen side. So we're okay with playing a move like a5, and then black really does need to break out. He needs to play b5. So he's going to play b5, we're going to take, he's going to take back with the rook, and then we're going to play knight a4. We're going to be holding this pawn with tempo while attacking the rook. So rook to b4, and now we're going to play queen e2, which has dual purpose. It's protecting this bishop, but also we're eventually going to be trying to break through with either e5 or f5 or both. So now we have knight to b6. We're going to have this exchange happen on b6, and here we have really what amounts to like a slight error. Petrosian thought he could get away with taking the pawn on b2, but as it turns out, this actually traps his bishop after rook b1. Rook takes, we have pawn to c3, and this bishop doesn't have a good way out before white can pile on the pressure. So after queen b8, we have this f5 breaking out, and we have pressure being put on this b2 bishop. And unfortunately, there just isn't a great way to save this bishop. This bishop doesn't have any good place to go, but especially since we have this conjunction of ideas of flying in with e5 followed by queen g6. So after e5, black had to play f5, but now we're going to play g4, and we're going to be threatening to break through here. So we've got two problems, which is the center just collapsed, and we're threatening to break through against the black king, but at the same time, we've also got this weak piece over here that right now we're having to hold with everything we've got. And just quite frankly, something has to give, and Petrosian decided to give up the piece. So he played bishop c3, takes, and the reason, of course, he did this was because this allows him to exchange material and at least not get mated over here on the king side. But this endgame is completely winning for white. So up the piece, white just continues with a few more moves, and then he manages to simplify, and he's just up the clean piece, and there's nothing that black can do. So that's basically the strategy against this really, I would say, really great move from black, and probably one of the most annoying moves that you're going to face when you play the Austrian attack against the Perk is this knight a6 move, because it does make it very, very difficult to play e5. It makes it very, very difficult to cut the board in half. But again, all you really need to do is just castle, and you're basically going to be playing more like a d-pawn opening, which is another reason that knight a6 was part of the reason that I wasn't ever really opposed to turning the Perk into a King's Indian, which is another option that you have, is you can just turn the Perk into a King's Indian, and you can exclusively, even if you're an e-pawn player, exclusively play King's Indian setups against the Perk. Because if they can force you to play something this much like a mainline Benoni, I really don't object to playing a mainline Benoni. So that's kind of my thinking. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you know better how to face this move, knight a6, in your own games in the future when you're playing the Austrian attack against the Perk. Thank you very much for watching.